Hey class, welcome back. If you check out the board behind me, we're going to go through very quickly what we saw in the lecture today. For our classes, Monday and Tuesday, remember we don't have classes coming Friday, but there will still be a video lesson out there, so do look for that and those that go along with it. Our key terms are basically straight out of CPO Chapter 6. A couple little changes. We put in the word fermentation instead of the word pigment, so a little bit of a switch there. And if you check out passive transport and active transport, we're talking about how things go into and out of a cell. One of the themes I want you to think about today is where does a cell get its energy to get things in and out? Where does a cell get its energy to make the proteins in the ribosomes like it does? And all the stuff that goes into getting a cell the energy it needs to carry out its functions. We know, of course, that mitochondria are the power plants of the cell, traditionally called that, but where does it get this energy? How does it get it? We're going to do a little bit of a review. We started off, before we got into the brain pop, no notes were required on it, but we saw today's January 11th CNN 10 student news, which is always kind of a good little intro to what's going on. We didn't watch the whole thing, just about the first 4 minutes. The first 2 or 3 minutes were about some of the extraordinary events going on in politics in the United States right now. The next couple of minutes was about COVID-19, which is why I showed it, because of course they're talking about the importance of things like masks and the way it gets spread. They were going on to say that it wasn't so much by surfaces, but more of droplets in the air, which is why the crossover happens when you're looking at things like politics, when people start having protests about masks and things like that. Remember, we're looking at the science, and the science is telling us that masks do help prevent the spread, whether a person has it or whether a person's trying to avoid getting COVID-19. Masks are important, and also social distancing. So we'll go talk a little bit more about that when we get into the immune system a little bit down the road. Okay, moving on, we saw a brain pop. We did a little bit on respiration and breathing. Not the same thing. Specifically cellular respiration, what goes on inside a cell to make its energy. And then finally, oxygen processes glucose. When we are looking at what goes on with sugars in foods, one of the things that we would be doing, were we in class, we'll do this as a demonstration lesson, is checking out how many calories you get out of food. We did this way back with a potato chip, I believe, on a previous week. This is just a piece of a sourdough cracker. And if you look at literally lighting it on fire, I know this seems a little silly, but when you're lighting something on fire like this and you're burning it, you're able to measure the heat energy. That's what the calorie is. It's heat energy. The heat energy that you're getting from the food. It smells a little like burnt toast in here right now. Blow that out. You take a calorimeter and you measure that. You see how much it raises the temperature of water. It tells you the heat energy stored in that food. Obviously, you can only do it with dried food. You can't do it with like a fresh apple, but if you dry out the apple, you have an apple chip, hey, you can burn it and you see how much the temperature goes up. That's what a calorie is. Humans do not get energy directly like this. Think about sprinters or marathon runners. When you're looking at someone run, you don't see flames shooting out of their ears. One of the things that we have to do is we have to take the sugars that we're finding in our food from, remember, good old photosynthesis, a little bit of a review here. Photosynthesis makes glucose, makes sugar. How do we get that sugar and use energy from it? We can't use it directly. We can't just burn it like this. There's another way that cells, the one little thing we have to talk about, how cells get their energy, and it's through this molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Just like we had DNA, where DNA is an abbreviation for deoxyribonucleic acid, ATP is an abbreviation for a long molecule called adenosine triphosphate. So let's check that out right now. I'm going to switch out the screens here real quick. I'm going a little bit fast because I just wanted to give a real quick recap of today's notes. On our recap, since our cells can't use the sugar directly, there has to be something that goes on inside the cell that converts the sugar into something it can use. It starts with glycolysis. Now, glycolysis is a term that is not one of our key terms. I'm pointing it out with a little parentheses under the parts of the word because it's a good time to talk again what we talked about last week, how you can tell in biology the meaning of a word very often by breaking it down. Glyco, you're looking at a word there, a root that has to do with sugar. Lysis, remember lysosomes? Remember Lysol, that spray that some people use to kill germs? Lyse means basically to kill it or break apart. Glycolysis, we're breaking down the sugars. We're breaking down the glucose, the glycogen. We're breaking it down inside the cell. This is the first of several steps that break down the sugars into something that the cell can use. If you check out all of the steps, it's not so much complicated as it takes a little while to remember them. Way back in the college days when I had to remember all the steps to the cycle, it does take a while to remember them. It's not that it's that complicated, it is just a lot of steps. They often go like this because it often shows it as a big circle where it makes that molecule that we already talked about, ATP. Borrowing from borrowing from Crash Course Biology with the Green Brothers there, you might have seen that. I am borrowing their term, so I will link that down in the notes below. The energy currency, I wish I'd thought of that term, it's a good term. The energy currency of a cell is this molecule called ATP. You can just abbreviate it ATP, it's easier than saying adenosine triphosphate, but the long and the short of it is, one of the things that we do inside a cell is constantly make ATPs, and our cells then use that ATP for energy. When you're looking at getting your energy directly from ATP using oxygen, it's a very efficient process, a little bit like the burning that we showed here. However, think about when you get energy in a way that doesn't use oxygen directly. Think about sprinters. I mentioned sprinters earlier. You ever seen someone when they sprint a race rather than, say, run a marathon? Some people are extraordinarily good at running for 2 or 3 or 4 hours in some cases in a marathon, or bicycling for a long way, or swimming for a long way. They use oxygen efficiently because they've trained their bodies to be very, very good about burning the oxygen with the ATPs that are available. What happens when you use energy faster than your body can supply it? Think about someone doing a 50-meter dash or a 100-meter dash, and you get done, and then you see them kind of leaning over, breathing really heavy. They're paying back what's called an oxygen debt. They're done running, but they're still out of breath. They're having to pay back an oxygen debt because they had to make some energy in a way that was not very efficient. They couldn't keep up with the demands that their body was putting on their muscles. So if you check out right here, another way that you can release energy is through fermentation. Now, for fermentation, I was going to talk a little bit about wine production. Right here in California, there's a lot of different things we could talk about. A lot of different foods are fermented. We use fermentation in all kinds of food preparation. But in this case, we're talking about a process that breaks down food using microorganisms. In this case, we're going to talk particularly about fungus or fungi. And in the case of wine, think about beer and wine. Wine, you take a trip just a few miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and you see grapevines up there, and people are making wine by crushing down the grapes, getting the sugary juice from the grape, getting it all together, and this is just colored water right here, and you put it into a bottle. Now, when you're doing that, you're taking a lot of sugar. Remember, the sugar was produced by photosynthesis by the vine when it put that into the grape. You've got the sugar, and then you're adding yeast to it. Now, the yeast feast on the sugar. They love this. And if you put a stopper in it like this, and you've got a sealed environment now, it's like taking a whole bunch of 8-year-olds and putting them in a room with a whole bunch of birthday cakes. You are going to have the feast of a lifetime with all these yeast going, hoo-hoo, we've got all the sugar we want. If you're looking at the yeast, a one-celled organism from the fungus kingdom, remember we saw these in the last chapter, the yeast start reproducing like crazy. And what do they make as a byproduct? They're getting rid of, they're throwing off, and this is one of those lessons that in 7th grade, 8th grade, high school and beyond, we also point out alcohol is a poison to them. They're getting rid of it. They're, through their metabolism, throwing out the carbon dioxide. They also are throwing out the alcohol. They're producing the alcohol, throwing out, it is poisonous to them, but you gotta remember, they're in a sealed environment. The alcohol in here is building up and building up and building up. Finally, it gets to the point where the alcohol gets so high that the yeast can't survive anymore. They are literally killed by the byproducts of their own metabolism. If you want to put this into a graph, I do a bad picture of a graph over here, but it looks something like this. As soon as you introduce the yeast to the sugar, their population goes up and up and up and up. Finally, it peaks out and it drops very quickly as they all die off. You've got carbon dioxide and alcohol building up to the point, and sometimes they actually run out of the sugars as well, depends on how much is in there, but they kill themselves off through their own metabolism, through being stuck in a sealed container. The wine industry basically takes that fluid that's been created with this, the yeast is at the bottom of this now, and they filter out the yeast, they put a fancy label on it, and they put it in a bottle and sell it. That is the basis for one of the major industries here in California. By the way, something like sparkling wine or beer works the same way. Look at one of the byproducts here. Carbon dioxide is putting the bubbles in there as well. So when you're looking at ways of getting energy from our food, we're looking at respiration with oxygen, or we're looking at fermentation. Check out the dozen key terms that we've got due by Friday, and I will see you all online next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.